Hello and welcome. My guest today is Andrij Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrij, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you again. It's a very busy week and a lot to talk about.
Yeah, so Andrij, Trump was on fire today. He claimed that Putin called him and said, "Can I help you with Iran?" And Trump replied, "No, I don't need help with Iran. I need help with you." Then he added, "I hope we can make a deal with Russia." I mean, is this a geopolitical negotiation or a parenting moment? Like, hey, mom, can I help you clean the kitchen? No, do your homework first. I mean, do you think Trump is actually sounding more confrontational toward Putin now?
This is the only play that President Trump knows, is to flex his muscles, show military might, yell sometimes. Today he was cursing out on the White House lawn against international relations issues. So that is simply the only play that he turns to. We saw that in the White House meeting with President Zelensky in February, where he visibly got upset. And so he raised his voice and he said this and that, as if he could, through his own force of personality, change the reality on the ground. But unfortunately for President Trump, it has not turned out that way as far as what Russia is doing against Ukraine. We know that the United Nations just reiterated this week that the attacks on Ukraine from this period in 2025 to the same period in 2024 has escalated by 50%. We see the attacks, open attacks on schools just in the recent week. This is something that has been increasing, not decreasing, under President Trump. He has not focused on it. And in fact, he has closed down the work group that he set up at the beginning of the administration to work out some kind of negotiation with Russia. It is very clear that they don't see, even though they may speak about having a diplomatic end, they don't see that Russia is interested in having a diplomatic end to this conflict.
And we all know Trump loves himself, that's nothing new. And clearly some British politicians are playing into that. Just look at Starmer lately. But do you think Trump has become more confident after the strike on Iran's nuclear facilities?
He's both more confident because, in fact, over the weekend, when the attack happened and in the following days, there were reports out of the White House that everybody was feeling much more victorious, and that they were happy that the White House was doing something positive in the world. Unfortunately, within the last 24 hours, that has come to a lot of frustration by President Trump because of that sense of victory, that sense of bravery, that muzhnost, as we say in Ukrainian, that Trump felt after that attack. It turned out that wasn't enough to cause a ceasefire, and which led to him to, again, speaking to reporters and cursing about the fact that Israel and Iran had not followed his instructions about having a ceasefire. Sometimes international relations do not go the way that you want them. And that is part of being a world leader, understanding that you don't control the world, but it is your job to try to find the best solution.
Trump's heading to the NATO Summit, and he joked it'll be claimer than what he just went through with Iran. So what do you think the summit might actually lead to?
Well, the summit is very different than what we saw 2 weeks ago. We know that it has been changed. We know that he is flying in the morning of the United States to be there for dinner at the Dutch royal family residency. There will be the dinner for the member nation leaders, and then there will be 1 2.5-hour session, and that'll be all the major sessions at this event. The public forums, the different parliamentary assemblies that met, etc., that still went on. But as far as the world leaders, they have radically shortened this in response to two things. One being the fact that the open conflict between Israel and Iran began. Secondly, they saw President Trump's behavior at the G7 summit when he arrived and then very shortly thereafter decided to leave. So instead of having a summit that like the G7, did not have one of its major leaders at it. They decided to shorten the extent of the major sessions. They will not have a very long communique as we've had for a long time. They will have short paragraphs. They may be combined on one page, but it will be about spending and a big announcement that President Trump wants about spending increases for all NATO countries. And beyond that, it'll be a very short, demure NATO summit with the goal, much like it's been on the 75th summit and the 74th summit in Vilnius and in America, respectively, to make sure that NATO is speaking with one voice. So if they see that having President Trump or trying to push President Trump towards putting out a statement in support of Ukraine, if that's not going to work, they're simply not going to have Ukraine mentioned as part of the final communique, because they would rather have unity than putting out a statement without everybody supporting it.
Mm-hmm. Putin won't dare anymore. That's the message. Is allies promise Ukraine over 35 billion in support. Sounds fantastic, and I don't mean that in a good way. Do you actually believe the UA will follow those on this kind of support?
I think we are turning a very, very big ship around in the water. And this is the analogy we've used for a lot of European events, particularly when people ask me, why did the color revolution start in Georgia and not Ukraine? Why did things, well, and when you have a smaller population, it's easier to make changes. Ukraine was a bigger boat, so it took longer time for a popular movement against autocracy, against corruption to rise up. And similarly, it takes a long time for all of these NATO allies to finally wake up and realize what the priorities are. So the Baltic countries have been screaming, the Polish, Ukraine, other countries in the area have been screaming at the West to wake up and understand that Russia is attacking you. It is doing cyber attacks. It is poisoning you. Do not fall for their trap of cheap gas and cheap oil. And just this week, we heard that Chancellor Merz of Germany came out and said we were wrong. We should have listened to our allies. And so the boat is slowly turning in the direction, not just with his words, but we've already seen all the promises of all these different nations promising to support Ukraine, promising to increase their defense production. And once we get on that direction, once the boat has turned, it'll take just as long to turn the boat back around if it were to stop. So that's the good thing about this. Once you have this large alliance start to increase defense production, start to take defense of its territory and its allies seriously, it is much harder than to change it back than it were if it hadn't changed. So.
Mm-hmm. And one more thing, NATO's Secretary General said that Trump has moved the war in Ukraine off dead center, but also that peace is still a long way off. I mean, what is he talking about? Did Trump really move the war with a couple of posts on Truth Social?
No, I mean, what's happening in the Middle East, what's happening in Russia, as the Secretary General of NATO mentioned at the opening of the summit, it's all connected. So you cannot just deal, as President Trump likes to, with the war in the Middle East without addressing Russia. And he also cannot deal with the war in Russia without dealing what Iran is doing and how Iran has influenced this. I would also like to bring up the fact that North Korea is very much involved in this. And as President Zelensky said, a whole host of allied nations, so you don't have to look at China products, but products from the United States, Europe, even Taiwan have been used in arms against Ukraine. So it really needs to be an across the board dealing with this problem. You don't just move one war, you need to deal with the entire issue. And I really think that in the coming year, unfortunately not today, but in the coming year, we will see this alliance between Iran, Russia, and North Korea specifically flourish even more. We just heard the announcement earlier this week that North Korea plans to start developing Shaheds within North Korean territory. It is also going to be sending workers to Russia to help construct Shaheds in factories in Russia. But why is this important for the Western alliance? because up until now, we have been helping Ukraine protect itself in some ways, not in the way we would like to cover the sky, but we have been sending anti drone and anti missile technology to help protect Ukraine, even though there aren't that many Westerners there. In Israel, we have a population of nearly 1 million American citizens that live in Israel. And so that makes it a slightly bigger priority to protect Israel, because we don't want to see the headlines for America or the West of how many Americans or Western citizens have been killed. Now, when you turn to South Korea, and we're talking about tens and tens of thousands of Western troops, American service members. If North Korea were to begin mass producing these drones and do the same thing to South Korea that Iran did to Tel Aviv and Haifa, or that Russia has been doing to Ukrainian cities and kindergartens and schools on a daily basis, we're talking about a different perspective. And that's what the conversations need to be at NATO, at G7, understanding how all of these things are connected.
Mm-hmm. And one more topic. Trump says they've made peace abroad, even though Russian war against Ukraine is still raging. And Israel and Iran are literally firing missiles at each other. At the same time, his promotion that he calls the great, big and beautiful bill, and claims we're entering a golden age. So what exactly is this bill about, and seriously, what kind of golden age is he talking about?
Well, the golden age is a rhetorical flourish that he's used since the campaign to simply market himself. However, the big, beautiful bill will really decide what the country's direction is going to go forward. At this point, we don't know that this big, beautiful bill will pass. It changes day by day. And why it's big and beautiful is that instead of passing several different pieces of legislation to deal with immigration, to deal with funding the government, to deal with international concerns, President Trump has decided, he was talked into the fact that it's better to combine all these legislations into one bill, which is positive, because if you pass the legislation, then everything you wanted is passed. But it's negative, because if it doesn't pass, you have nothing in your budget. And you would probably turn to having a continuing resolution, which means the government is funded simply at last year's levels for a series of time until they can come up with a new deal for the national budget. Unfortunately, this big, beautiful bill was negotiated primarily about domestic concerns. It will drastically change taxation in the United States. It will drastically increase the deficit in the United States. And why is that important in regards to current events? Because as soon as this bill passes, the president will have to turn to Congress and say, oh, by the way, we now have more warships in the Middle East. We now have more planes flying above the Middle East. We need fuel. We need money for all these planes. We need money for all these service members. And we don't have that in the budget right now. He's going to have to find an emergency supplemental budget this year. And that's something that's going to have to be talked about. That doesn't factor into the deficit negotiations that are happening right now for the big, beautiful bill. Many people point out the fact that it will increase our deficit, hurting the United States. On the other hand, most people in the Republican Party simply want it to pass because it's their agenda.
Mm-hmm. You know, Bloomberg reports that analysts in both the US and Europe fear that NATO could actually fall apart under Trump's second term. Do you think that's a real risk?
I think it's more of a risk in the first term with his rhetoric, but why it's less of a risk now is that the other members of the NATO alliance are prepared. They are experienced with Trump. And so we saw that today with the press conference of President Zelensky, with Ursula von der Leyen, Mark Rutte. We see that Europe is standing together. And I really believe that the first 75 years of NATO, where we saw that America was in the lead, is going to be changing to a different 75 years, where Europe will be in the lead of NATO. And even if the United States changes its stance with NATO and does less international deployments with NATO, I still believe that NATO will be the foremost military alliance in the world, and it will simply be led by a different coalition of people.
According to the Financial Times, Germany and Italy are considering moving their gold reserve out of US vaults. In other words, they want their gold back. But will Trump actually give it to them? Is this just about repatriation, or does it signal a deeper shift in global trust and power?
It's not just global trust, but power. It is true that the European nations are now seeing the fact that they will now become a stronger military power as a combined unit, whether it's NATO or a separate EU army, et cetera. They will be stronger by themselves and not as reliant on the United States militarily. They also, therefore, do not want to be reliant on the dollar as the dominant currency in the world, and specifically the United States Treasury bill. So investment in the United States has always been the gold standard around the world. And investment in U.S. debt means that you will always get back your money. It will not collapse, and it is fiscally stable. We've seen over the past 15 years that the United States debt isn't that stable. It's fluctuating much more than it has in the past. Its credit rating has been reduced. It's not. It's only been reduced from an A+ to an A or an A-, but still it has been reduced, and that opens the door for those who have argued for European Treasury bills, for Europe to sell its debt or investment in Europe as being more stable, perhaps. And we see that in investment in European military factories, military firms. That we see Eurosat, how the stocks for Eurosat are skyrocketing, with more people doubting the effectiveness or the stability of Starlink in the future. So Europe is really taking the opportunity to rethink how the global order is, and perhaps if they're building up their strategic military assets, they should also think about their economic assets as well.
Andrij, thank you for joining us. It was a real pleasure to see you again and hear your perspective.
All right, thank you, and until next time.
Yeah.